Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero. Our guest today is documentary filmmaker Rory Kennedy. She has the point of view of a rather remarkable life. She's the youngest daughter of Ethel and Robert Kennedy. Yes, that Robert Kennedy. But while her family certainly wields influence in a lot of ways and in a lot of places, and she does make films with a social conscience and some that explore political themes, her voice as a filmmaker is uniquely hers. And she seems to shy away from nothing. Whether she's exploring the health crises in pandemic facing AIDS or epidemic Africa, or questioning ethics in Last Days of Vietnam, Ghosts of Abu-Ghraib, shining light on policy gone wrong in Homestead Strike or The Fence, exploring familial themes in American Hollow, All Kinds of Families, A Boy's Life, telling the deeply personal story she tells of her own mother and featuring her own family in Ethel, or inspiring us all to reach deeper and go farther in Take Every Wave, the story of Laird Hamilton, or Above and Beyond, NASA's Journey to Tomorrow. She faces these subjects with sensitivity and candor and a very special kind of clarity. If you can't tell, I'm a big fan of her work. And I want to give a nod to Laird Hamilton, who appeared on the Break It Down show back in 2017 to discuss Take Every Wave and initiated our dive into Rory's films and her appearance here with us. Thank you, Laird, for turning us on to Rory. Now, I want to take a second to invite you to support two of our favorite causes. First, Save the Brave. You can read about them at savethebrave.org. They're a certified 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to helping veterans cope with post-traumatic stress. You can read all about them, donate a few bucks to help them help some veterans who can use a hand. Pete and I both support Save the Brave with our time and with recurring contributions right out of our PayPal accounts. And Scott Husing supports them too. He serves on their board. They do great work, and we urge you to consider supporting them as well. If you would buy a combat veteran a lunch once a month, well, that's the kind of money we're asking. You can set up recurring PayPal contributions right at savethebrave.org, and we urge you to do it. Also, Healing in Harmony is a 501c3 started by singer and guitarist David Victor, who saw the difference that live music made in the lives of healing patients when he was in the band Boston immediately following the terrorist attack at the Boston Marathon. Since then, he and his team of professional wandering minstrels have fostered the healing process with beautiful music at cancer wards, trauma centers, and at children's hospitals across the country. You can read about them at harmonyandhealing.org and donate to keep them going as well. We'd also like you to support the Break It Down show on whatever platform you're listening to us on right now. iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, YouTube. Please help us out with a rating and a positive review. It helps new listeners find us, and we really appreciate you doing it. And we appreciate you listening in. And you can rate us and review us while you're watching one of the 18 documentary films that Rory has directed and over a dozen more that she's produced. So go to Amazon Prime or iTunes and watch Rory's latest film, Above and Beyond, NASA's Journey to Tomorrow, right after you hear her tell Pete and me about why she made it and how she built this rich and prolific career. Here is our guest today, Rory Kennedy.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hi, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hi, this is Rory Kennedy, and you are listening to The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Terrific. Rory Kennedy is a documentary filmmaker. She's been at the practice for about 25 years now, and her latest film is called Above and Beyond, and it celebrates the 60th anniversary of NASA. Well, it coincides with us celebrating the 60th anniversary of NASA next month. So you have, though, a number of films that came before it, and it's tough to really put a through line in all of those films because you've explored a number of different topics in a number of different directions. Family life in a variety of settings throughout the country, the achievements of individuals, some of the dangers that we're faced with and have to face down. And there's just a lot going on in your body of work. Let's start with your most recent film, though. What was the catalyst for? Where'd you start?
So that film came from the Discovery Channel. The executives there approached us and asked us if we would consider making a feature documentary about the history of NASA, looking at the last 60 years and their accomplishments. And I immediately jumped at the chance because I'm so grateful to NASA for all that it has taught us over the years, from everything that we know about this planet, as well as the solar system, our universe. And I think that there have been many accomplishments over the years, but I think to sort of take the time and really put them together in a 90-minute film, condense that, celebrate this extraordinary institution and what a gift it's been to humanity, felt like an exciting opportunity.
All right.
It is. So anybody who follows you on Facebook or anything else knows that you really care about the planet and the climate. Did you know going in that this movie would bring those two things together?
I did not have that intention when I went into the film, but as I learned more about what NASA has done over the last 60 years, not only in helping us understand our place in the universe and our solar system and so on, but in doing so was able to really come to appreciate this planet and both how precious it is and how vulnerable it is.
Oh.
A lot of people don't realize that most of the information we know about climate change and what's been happening to Earth over the last 40, 50, 60 years has come from NASA.
Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from the Break It Down Show, checking in real quick to ask you this. John, Scott, and I all support Save the Brave with our time, our location, our effort, and our money. Each month we give a small amount. Do the same with us. Go to savethebrave.org, click on the Donate tab, pick an amount that you want to come out each month, and they will handle all the rest. I stand behind these folks. Thank you so much. Let's get back to the show.
A lot of people don't realize that most of the information we know about climate change and what's been happening to Earth over the last 40, 50, 60 years has come from NASA. They are the source of most of that information, and it's repackaged by scientists all over the world. They make their data available to anybody who wants it, ostensibly. But they are really the people who are out there. They have the satellites that once looked outward. They turn their direction so that they look back on Earth for some of them, and sent a number of new satellites up there that really just are exclusively focused on monitoring Earth. I think there's about 19 satellites right now that are monitoring our planet. And then in addition to that, they have people that are sent out on aircraft to validate that data, and then scientists on the ground all over the planet to further validate that data. So, you know, they have a very thorough approach to their scientific data, and now they have been able to be, having gathered this for many decades now, to basically put that data into formulas that enable us to both understand what's happened to date and project forward as to what will happen.
When you start a project, do you ever begin with the end in mind? In other words, is there usually an objective?
Yes, I usually do begin with an end in mind, and then it usually changes.
But that's fair, though. I mean, you have to allow the evolution.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I try to do a good amount of research before I even start a project. So I do have a vision for it and a direction for it. But then as I engage with the interviews, continue that research, do archival research, that all starts to make a picture that kind of crystallizes at some point during the process towards a focus. And, you know, for this film, I felt that both in understanding the Apollo missions and some of the early Apollo missions, and really that was the beginning of this deep appreciation and scientific discovery of the planet Earth when, the Apollo 8 mission went around the moon. It was the first mission to go around the backside of the moon. They came around the other side and they saw Earth. And they took that amazing picture called Earthrise. And it was the first time humans had seen Earth from a photograph taken by another human in outer space.
Yeah.
And so,
what a sight to behold.
Yeah. And onward, we have the beautiful image of the entirety of Earth that came from another Apollo mission. And so, and during that Apollo 8 mission, one of the astronauts said to the other, we came to discover the moon and we discovered Earth.
Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of the premise of the film. We went to discover outer space and we really discovered how precious this planet is because with all the work that NASA has done and, everything we now understand about our solar system and outer space, which is extraordinary and breathtaking and awe-inspiring, we have yet to find life out there and we've yet to find another planet that we can live on.
Yeah.
So this is what we got and we better take care of it. And we're not doing a very good job, unfortunately.
When Jim Lovell goes around the backside of the moon and takes that picture, with Frank Borman, he's the only guy, at least, who was able to go back. I guess that's not true later on, but he's the first guy to go back around the backside of the moon on a different ship to be able to say, check out what you're about to see.
Wait a minute, guys. Here it comes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's incredible when you think about that, though. Like, it's a thing that only 12, I guess maybe 24 people have seen ever, when you have all the crew and everything. It's just remarkable to have that point of view and to bring back that lesson to discover the Earth. And then all the things about the atmosphere and how thin it was, and they all brought that back.
Yeah, and I think that is a through line, again, that sort of evolved very organically in the interviews I did with so many astronauts, is that they all talked about that moment, which many of them didn't anticipate or expect, but breaking through to the other side of the atmosphere and looking back at our planet. And I think there's a real sense of just love and seeing how thin that atmosphere is and how vulnerable it is. There was one astronaut I spoke to who, before going up to the International Space Station, spent many months, among other things, studying the Earth because he wanted to know where he was and what country he was over at what given time and whatnot. So he had studied all of the maps and he had every country memorized. And then, of course, he got up there and there's no lines.
Yes.
Right. And, there's this realization of we are all one people.
It doesn't matter.
And it doesn't really matter. And all of those lines are human created, arbitrary, and not really the point.
And you did a great job of capturing that. I was constantly trying to figure out what's that? And like some places you can pick up, for the most part, you have no idea what delta you're looking at. It's great.
You can register continents, but
And I think that the introduction, and we're not, don't worry, listeners, we're not blowing it for you. So go watch the movie and we're not going to give anything away. But there was a point that you made in introducing the film that there is a process of exploration. And that I think is what it boils down to, because we're talking about when you talk about astronauts, you're talking about highly trained, typically with a military background, and guys who are calculated and have a job to do and have honed their careers in that way, and who are highly intellectual, and then get up there and suddenly the things that we thought mattered don't matter. And that was my takeaway. And I think that if there's the through line in your films, it's something of that nature where we go into whatever the subject matter is, and again, a varied subject matter throughout your films, but what we come away with is, well, that's not what I thought it was.
Yeah, well, I think that's the exciting part of my job, is that it's always I am always learning, and I think that there's information that's unexpected about any given subject, and to be able to have the audiences kind of go on that journey with me is a kind of important stylistic approach that I have. So it's not kind of a rigid, this is the story I'm going to tell, and I'm going to tell it within these lines, and I'm going to tell it in this particular way. Every film is different. Sometimes I use a narrator, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I narrate my own film, sometimes I don't. sometimes they're verite, sometimes they're more archival in nature. And to me, there's always what you talk about, these kind of unexpected kernels that are really revealing and interesting.
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple creative choices you made along the way that I wanted to ask you about. One is, obviously you can't tell the story without talking about your uncle, because he's the spark basically that makes all this happen. When do you know, like, is it too much, or do you worry about that, with the family connection? And then when you show that, I really like this, when he does the speech at Rice, you showed more of it. Not just we do the things that are hard.
Not just a soundbite, yeah.
Yeah, and it was really wonderful. The other thing is, and this is me just trying to figure this out, there's a feminine element, from my perspective, to how you told some of the stories, like with the lost shuttles. Instead of showing the machine, which is masculine in my mind, you showed the folks in control in the moment, and it's giving me chills right now.
Yeah.
And when they realize that, and because we're always just showing the machine.
Yeah.
Destructing, and you still showed that part to give the context, but I would love to hear about your thoughts on those two elements that you
right.
did.
Well, I appreciate you doing such a careful read of the film and noticing those details. I think in terms of kind of the connection of my own personal story and my own, family history, I think if I included in a film, which I would only do if it was a really organic, natural part of the storytelling, I probably lean towards doing it in a minimalist fashion. Mm-hmm. It's not something I really want to dwell on, but I think it's important for me to have a transparent relationship with the audience, and to, I don't want somebody to say, well, Rory Kennedy did a film about her mother, but she never said she was her daughter. Like, that would just be weird, right? Yeah. So, that's not where I'm coming from. And to do a film about NASA, and, having watched that speech at Rice University and the role that my uncle played, it would be really odd not to, at least acknowledge it. And then I did feel that speech was, as well as, the accomplishment of actually us, in that speech, my uncle says we're going to get to the moon within the decade, right? I mean, we didn't even have a rocket ship that could, at that point. So it was really audacious, this idea, and yet we delivered, which is such an extraordinary thing. And I think so many people connect NASA to that moment of actually getting to the moon. So it feels such a significant part of NASA's history that I didn't want to take away from that. So in many ways, my uncle bookends the film, right?
Yeah.
He's the beginning of the film, and then we come back to him with this idea of, his vision 50 years ago, 60 years ago, let's get to the moon. And then us doing it. And now we have this crisis that we're facing here on Earth, which is climate change, and facing, the possibility of extinction in a real way. And that my feeling is that if you have that level of leadership that you had with John F. Kennedy saying, we're going to do this, we're going to commit the resources to it, and had the vision for it and was able to implement it, that we can do the same with climate change. So bringing his speech back at the end saying, this is our new moon shot. Yeah. Right, is fixing this problem, and it needs to come both from the leadership in our country as well as around the world to help us arrive there. And I don't think we should be having to rely on a 16-year-old girl who is leading this charge right now. And it is a damn shame our leaders aren't visualizing that and able to direct us towards what is really necessary at this time. And there's a window here, and we're going to lose it in the next few years if we aren't active.
You brought up the way that your uncle bookended the film, and I think that one of the things that I enjoy about your movies is some of them are hard to watch. The Ghost of Abu-Ghraib, that was difficult to watch.
It was difficult to make.
I bet it was. How much of your process happens after capturing? And I know that you say that sometimes you have an end in mind and then it changes. So how much of it is just that you are capturing all of this data and then you go back into the editing suite where a mountain of work must begin
Yeah.
because you have to carve a narrative.
I mean, I usually have a vision, as I say, going into it, and it's usually put to paper in, somewhere between a 5-page and 20-page treatment, which is usually necessary to get the financing for any particular project, frankly.
Okay.
And it's also, to me, a really important part of the process. But then, as I say, you go, do massive numbers of interviews and people say things that are unexpected. And then I would say, a part of the process that I start very early is doing the archive research, because I often find that the archival elements can drive the storytelling. That was certainly the case with the NASA film.
Yeah.
Where, there are, for example, Hubble, right? The images that Hubble has gathered are so magnificent. And that archival moment is something that I want to land for the viewers. And so I'm looking at these images and feeling that this has to be a significant part of the film, in addition to just what we have learned and kind of the role Hubble plays in the overall narrative of NASA, in terms of just the knowledge we've gained from it, but the visuals are so powerful, right? So I'm going to have that storyline be maybe more significant than it might be if I was just writing a paper about NASA, because it's so powerful, I think, visually, and so stunning and exciting and sort of thrilling, I hope, for the audience. It certainly is for me.
Yeah.
And similarly, with a film like Abu-Ghraib, the images of that film and the photographs that came out of Abu-Ghraib were so stunning that was the driving force of that film. And so that's something that evolves often as I learn not just about the events or the chronological order of something, of a story I'm trying to tell, but what are the pictures, and how do those pictures, what role do they play in the film, and how can I drive the narrative towards that? I would say I had, a similar experience with Last Days in Vietnam, which was a film that I did about really the last 24 hours of that war. And, we came across sort of randomly and with some real great luck of a story of a pilot, a Vietnamese pilot who was escaping, and he couldn't land on any of the ships, and he was running out of gas, and he ended up having to throw his family out of the helicopter onto a moving ship, and there was photographs and video of it.
Yeah.
Right. So that created a whole storyline for our film that wouldn't have happened had I just been reading books, right?
Yeah.
And definitely deserved to be told and represented the desperation that was happening.
Yeah,
right then.
no, it was an extraordinary moment in the film, and I think very, one of the most memorable for people. But my point is that the visuals to me often drive the story. And then I would say, the other point which you touched on in my experience is that these films, you're gathering the information in the field, but they're made in the edit room.
Yeah.
And that's where you can sort of make or break a film, which might have really powerful material, but I think the magic really happens, and the hard work on some level really happens in that edit room. And, the exciting work as well. And I want to give my husband kudos, because he's my partner in this, and he's a writer. He writes books and scripts, and he also helps with and works with me as my partner in making these documentaries. And so he is of great value in that edit room, because he's very good on story.
In these hard stories in the edit room.
Let me ask you a question that Pete asked, though, because before we get off the topic, you brought up Last Days of Vietnam. One of the things that I don't want to go unasked that Pete contemplated was, did Henry Kissinger in the film, he was really pretty candid, and we couldn't figure out whether he was candid because you, in your interview, opened him up, or whether he's just to the point where it's all out there now. How hard did you have to work on Henry Kissinger?
I mean, it was an interesting experience working with him, for sure, and talking to him about these events. I have to say, it was quite stunning. I think he maybe was 90 years old when I interviewed him. And his memory of the events down to the minutes was as sharp as can be. I mean, I had been like in this world for a year, so I knew everything that had happened at every, particularly in that 24-hour period, like what happened at 11 o'clock, and he was able to break it down in extraordinary detail.
Yeah.
And decisions.
You had documented a timeline in writing, and he just came from memory.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, I had the memory of it because I had been so embedded in it, but he was, it was fresh for me because I had been working on it for a year. But these were events that had happened 50 years prior. So that was or 40 years prior. But that was an extraordinary thing to witness. And I think that there's an experience you have when you're interviewing people where you guys, I'm sure, have it too, where people are just repeating words that they've said over and over again, versus when you can really feel that they're remembering, like they are there and they're saying what they're experiencing.
And I say I listen for things, not two things. I'm listening for those moments and trying to break that open.
Yes.
Is that what you did with Kissinger then, or?
I don't want to take credit entirely for that. I mean, I think that, I do interviews and I try to get those moments, right? And so I work towards that. But he delivered it, and that was his doing too. So, I mean, I think it's a relationship. It's a dynamic. In that case, two people who are having a conversation, and how willing and how deep are you able to go. And so, I think another point during the interview was cried, which I didn't end up using in the film because it was kind of off topic of what we were focused on in the film, but it was a pretty intense moment.
I wanted to ask you the question about editing, because it's one thing to say the magic happens in the editing room, but you're also looking at a lot of footage. Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here. And if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it. I wanted to ask you the question about editing, because it's one thing to say the magic happens in the editing room, but you're also looking at a lot of footage of Chaffee, White,
who knows how much.
Sally Ride. These people aren't with us anymore. And part of that story are the people that we've lost along the way. The two different shuttle crews, you're living with them, watching maybe the last moments of their life recorded.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an intense experience for sure. And I experienced it as well with Ghost of Abu-Ghraib, where you're, you're living with these images, and they're so horrendous and disturbing and unsettling and all of those things, and making films about, people living with AIDS and children with AIDS. And, you're sitting there in the edit room with it. And, I mean, I think that what drives me is having been exposed to a lot of conditions that are what I think many people would consider pretty abject suffering and challenging, and seeing the capacity of human beings able to overcome that, right? And I mean, there's this saying, 1 million people die and it's a statistic, and one person dies and it's a tragedy, right?
Yeah.
And
Wow.
So I think actually Hitler said that, which is sort of horrible to quote him. But I think that the point with these films is that you can get to that one person and you have that experience and that connection.
Especially with Krista McAuliffe, because she was so featured. She was such a unique element in that story.
Yeah.
And you just look like, they're doing tight close-ups on her because she's
such an integral part of that story from that time.
Yeah. I mean, there was this feeling because it was a film that really focused on 60 years of NASA history that any of those stories could make their own documentary.
Yeah.
And to sort of hone in on them was always a temptation. I kept calling Discovery saying, "Are you sure you don't want to do a series?" You know, it's incredibly rich material with NASA.
Do you know about the soccer ball story from Challenger?
No.
Can't remember his name, but the Asian astronaut, heritage astronaut, he went to his daughter's school soccer team, and they all signed a ball, and he had the ball with him, and it was in his duffel bag on the shuttle, and it survived.
Amazing!
Wow,
it's at their school.
Wow,
where it came from, and it's just like there's a documentary right there, like the story of this ball, and it's like. It's shocking.
Yeah.
And you take all of the, and I mean, I'm telling you, your job, you know this, but all those human elements, you pull them out and you just give them to the audience and we'll just all pick our jaws up off the floor.
Yeah. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
Sometimes we pick our jaws up off the floor. Other times we long for some closure, the last days of Vietnam, or in some of your movies, you sew it up at the end so that we feel like, okay, now I know what that was all about. And in other movies like American Hollow, we're left wondering, okay, where from here?
Yeah.
And some of them are a mix of that. Take Every Wave was kind of, okay, we got the sense of what Laird had done and that he's still creating a future that's going somewhere. And I forgot where I was going with this,
you're
except
so nice.
to say,
I will say that you are so nice to watch all my films.
Well, they're excellent.
yeah,
They're excellent.
You guys have done your homework.
We also had Laird on the show, and he's really he was the catalyst for us watching your films, because he spoke glowingly about, he's notoriously closed off. He doesn't care that anybody know about him at all. And, his comment about you was that you really made him comfortable to open up, and you made him comfortable to tell a story that, he doesn't care that anybody knows. And you are, as we, started watching your movies, we thought, man, you are all over the place, and you managed to pull that out of people. I mean, we're talking about, you got it out of Laird, you got it out of Vietnamese pilots that had to escape. You got it out of Henry Kissinger, for crying out loud, who I think what my question is, don't you want to do a series? Can't we do a series? Because I want to talk about much more specifically about what it's like to make a film about your mother.
Oh my God.
And what it's like to juggle that dynamic, even though you had plenty to work with and you have lots of siblings to interview. There's still, if I made a film about my mother, there's no way I could get through that and create something that anybody would, it would be sentimental to me, but not to anybody else. And you were able to tell the story in a way that attached all of us.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. That was a hard one. I would say that was my hardest on not just a kind of personal and emotional level for me, but I'm really, and I actually, that was a film that Sheila Nevins at HBO had really pushed me to make, and I kept saying no to her. Mm-hmm. And she kept coming back. She had met my mother a number of times through me, and she kept coming back saying, you need to make this film about your mother. And my mother hasn't done an interview in, I think, 25 years, 30 years. I mean, she hates talking about herself. She doesn't like doing interviews. She doesn't like sitting down. It's just so not her nature. So I kept thinking, well, I can't keep saying no to Sheila Nevins, who's like the queen of documentaries at HBO. And so I'll say yes, and then just ask my mother, and she'll say no. And then I asked my
You're
mother,
off the hook.
And she said yes.
Oh boy. There went your excuse.
I was really shocked. And I remember asking her after I finished the film, why did you say yes? It was so unexpected. And she said, I said yes because you asked me.
Yeah.
And anyway, which was very sweet of her.
Yeah.
I know we're running up against your heart out, so I want to make sure we respect that. But I totally agree with that whole thing. People ask me all the time, how do you get great people? How do you get Rory Kennedy? Well, you ask. And let them say no. And then it turns out a lot of them are just like, yeah, of course.
Sure.
Like, let's do it. Not my favorite thing, but you're right. I should do this.
Yeah, we never thought we'd have Laird on the show.
Yeah.
But we had Gabby before we had Laird, and we said, will you help us get Laird? And she said, yeah, I don't know how successful I'll be, but I'll try.
Well, I'll do whatever Gabby and Laird do. So
yeah, likewise.
You guys, but it's great that you're doing the work you're doing and doing this in Orange County, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure it gets out
everywhere.
all over the world.
He's in Orange County. I'm in the Bay Area.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, it's great that you guys are doing your work and helping to get the stories of various people and the work they're doing out in the world. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you.
I would like to, before we end, talk a little bit about the work I'm doing right now with the Climate Emergency Fund.
Sure, please.
If you wouldn't mind.
No. I want to respect your time.
Yeah. So after having made the NASA film and talked to all these NASA scientists, many of whom are very, very concerned about where we're heading as a planet and human beings on this planet and the role we're playing. One scientist I spoke to who was focused on earth science, but also had fixed Hubble and, gone up to the International Space Station and so on and so forth. Yeah. Pierce Sellers, extraordinary man. He had been diagnosed with cancer, pancreatic cancer, and had less than a year to live, and was asked how he was going to live the last year of his life, which I asked him. And he said that he considered all of his options and that he decided to go back to work at NASA doing the earth science work because he feels that we are on a train wreck, and it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And that he needs to do everything in his power to help people understand that.
And the film is dedicated to him.
And the film is dedicated to him. And, part of the reason that we redirected towards the kind of earth science work that NASA is doing is because of interviews like that and understanding the urgency of that message. But about 2 or 3 weeks after this film came out on the Discovery Channel, I lived outside of Los Angeles and were hit by the Woolsey fire and had to evacuate with my 3 children and my husband and our 2 goats and our 3 dogs going down the Pacific Coast Highway with this huge plume of smoke. And one of the things that these NASA scientists predicted is that there will be more as a result of a warming climate across the earth, that there would be more extreme weather events, and whether that's hurricanes or tornadoes, floods, droughts, and fires.
Right.
And then, of course, we were hit by this massive fire, the biggest fire in California history. And we, I think it really kind of inspired me to get more deeply involved in climate change issues. So I, along with Trevor Neilson and Eileen Getty, started the Climate Emergency Fund. And the idea of that fund is to support efforts of people getting into the streets and causing disruption. And so, we help support the climate emergency strike, the youth-led strike that happened last Friday. And we also are supporting groups like Extinction Rebellion that are very active in Europe and now are coming to the United States with support from us and other efforts to try to bring this issue really into the streets.
Yeah, well, this is what we need, right? We've got to take this seriously, and we're going to learn along the way, just like Apollo and onto the shuttle, and we get better at all of these things, but we got to get to the getting. So we can actually get better at doing this. Yeah,
and we got to demand that our policymakers really take initiative on this, or that they're going to get fired.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you don't like how it's going,
either do the job or get out.
Yeah,
but don't stay there doing nothing.
It's easy to run on climate. Yeah, it's easy to run on climate, but where's the result? Chop, let's get to it.
Yeah,
or we'll get someone else that will. Yeah. Absolutely.
And I just want to say that if somebody doubts your foresight about such things, they should watch The Fence, which was made in 2010. It was about several of the things that it was about. Among them were the deception that really was around building a wall between us and Mexico. And then I'd like to point to thank you, Mr. President, the story of Helen Thomas, which you made. And that was made in 2008, years before we got ourselves a president who no longer has White House press briefings. Again, if anybody doubts your foresight, they need only watch those 2 things.
Thank you for pointing that out.
It's hard to watch some of your movies, and those two movies in particular, it's hard to watch and not shake your head at the same time.
Yeah. Well,
So
here we are.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we'll keep doing that.
Thank
'Cause
you.
We need that voice. You know, your brother's work, your work. It's we all have to. And like we've had Dr. Stephen Running. He won the Nobel Peace Prize the year that Al Gore won. You know, part of that community, and he's like, so simple things. Could we just not burn coal? Everything else we can work on later. Let's just make that a big goal. And, you know, like there's people working on processing methane into CO2 and then CO2 into some kind of sequestration kind of thing. There's a lot of progress, but like you said, we really have to take this a lot more seriously, put a lot more effort into it.
Yeah. Our guest today has been Rory Kennedy. We are huge admirers of your work and big fans of the stuff that you've done, and we look forward to doing other things with you. I'm nudging. Anything that you are into promoting, we would love to get behind. So
Thank you.
keep us on your list.
Okay, it's a deal.
All
It's been
right.
great talking to you both.
Thank you. Rory Kennedy, everybody.
Our visit with Rory Kennedy at the office she works out of in Santa Monica also yielded an introduction to her friend and neighbor, Trevor Neilson. Trevor is co-founder and CEO of IX Investments, an entrepreneurial multi-strategy impact investment platform addressing the areas of renewable energy, carbon to value, waste to energy, green commercial real estate, gender equality, education, and media. He's also the co-founder and partner of Global Philanthropy Group. He's been involved in the creation and implementation of many of the world's most respected philanthropic initiatives. Prior to that, he served as executive director of the Global Business Coalition, which is focused on global health issues. He reported to Ambassador Richard Holbrooke, former U.S. ambassador to the UN, and President Obama's former special representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan. Prior to that, Trevor worked with Bill and Melinda Gates, both in their family office and as director of special projects and as a founding member of the team that created and launched the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where he served as the director of public affairs. He also served in the White House during the Clinton administration, and just for Pete, he helped found Bono's Debt AIDS Trade Africa, known as DATA, organization, is now called the One Campaign, and continues to serve on its policy board. Along with Rory, Trevor founded the Climate Emergency Fund, which was created to support the individual activists and organizations working to wake up the public to the threat of climate change and demand action from our leaders. He does some impactful and impressive work, and Pete and I will be back there soon to talk with Trevor for a full episode of the Break It Down show. But first, he gives us a little insight on what he's working on now. Here's Trevor Neilson.
And Trevor, you were dragged in here by Rory Kennedy.
Yes.
She said, you know what, while we have a few minutes, you really should talk to Trevor.
By my ear, perhaps.
Yeah. So tell us what it is that you're doing here at, is it IMX?
No, IX Investments is the
IX.
name of my company. It's a impact investing platform that I founded with Howard Warren Buffett, who's Warren's grandson.
Okay.
And we make investments that are focused on achieving top tier returns, but also measurable social impact. So every investment we make has to accomplish both of those things. But the thing that I've been working on with Rory is the Climate Emergency Fund, which, you know, is really the first entity in the world that is dedicated to raising money for activist groups that have rejected a gradualist approach to climate activism and instead have embraced a disruptive approach, one that, you know, celebrates people like Greta Thunberg and other kids and college students and people that believe that, you know, the sixth extinction represents an incredible threat to humanity and that we have to fight back if we want to stop the climate emergency. And so Rory and I founded the Climate Emergency Fund with Eileen Getty.
Mm-hmm.
And so far I've made about 30 grants, all to organizations that really reject gradualism. People that are saying, you know, the past approach to environmental issues and environmental activism has largely been one that has told people that you don't really have to make big sacrifices or change much. You know, that there's an easy pathway to saving the world from the climate emergency. The truth is we're way past that. You know, we're in a very serious place right now with carbon.
In establishing a fund, is your priority to grow the fund so that you can fund the projects, or is your priority that you grow the fund with consideration for what you're investing in?
Great question. Our model is just to raise money and get it out the door as fast as we possibly can.
Okay.
So I'm really proud of the fact that we made 30 grants in the first 30 days that we existed.
That's amazing.
The model is to make small grants. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're a high school student in Florida, and you've noticed that your town has been, in the 16 years you've been alive, your town has been hit by hurricanes 4 times, and twice they destroyed half of the town, and once they destroyed your grandma's house down the road, right? And you're smart enough to know that science is real, and that physics are real, and that carbon emissions and climate change fuel hurricanes and extreme weather events. And you, as a kid, have more wisdom on this topic than the President of the United States, and you have decided that you want to do something about it. Well, you may go to the Extinction Rebellion website, and the Extinction Rebellion website will give you all of the arguments and the intellectual backing and the scientific backing and many of the tools to organize. But you might still need a couple $100 to print banners
right.
at FedEx, or to buy pizza for your friends when you get them together.
We're going to help you out.
Try to get them to help you out, or for bus fare, for 50 people that want to come to your first rally. And so the Climate Emergency Fund is set up to make very small grants.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the largest we've made, I think, is $50,000,
Mm-hmm.
which in the world of grant making is pretty small. I used to work for Bill Gates, and we would make billion-dollar grants.
Right.
But you'd be amazed at what a group of college students or high school students or other young activists can do with $1,000 or $5,000.
Yeah.
And so that's the model. And that way we're able to make grants quickly too, because you're not going to spend a huge amount of time, navel gazing about the worthiness of a $1,000 grant. Either you're going to make it or you're not.
Right.
And so that's the model. There's nothing like it in the world of philanthropy. And I think it's filling a really important need at a time when there is more leadership coming from grassroots activists than there is from any government official. It's very clear that our government is not going to address this crisis until we force them to.
Yeah. So a couple of things about that point. First, that we did collectively hire these people who are making decisions on our behalf that are, let's just say, wrong. The second thing is that if there are young people out there who are figuring out what it is you do and how they can get to you so that you can help them, it's really the investment model of anything has to do with what do you bring to the table and how can we help you out? And all you're doing is where other investments in other types of endeavors might say, boy, you sure have invested a lot of money. You've invested a lot of your capital. This is about rewarding those who have a great idea and a lot of sweat equity and a lot of things to get done that are focused and that just need a little bit of funding.
Yeah, I mean, anybody that's interested can go to climateemergencyfund.org. It's a nonprofit. You can make a donation there. You also can seek a grant there. And actually, you'll see on the website that there are different levels that we've outlined for the grants. You bring up an interesting point, which is that, this in a certain way is an admission that our institutions have failed on this topic. And it's a really difficult admission for people to make. I'm not just talking about Fox News, right-wing Republicans.
Yeah.
I'm talking about centrists, progressives, people that just can't quite get their head around the fact that government has failed as it relates to climate change.
Right. You heard me have kind of dancing around it and hesitating to say it's wrong. Let's go.
And so you've got that. And then you also have people that just don't see themselves as activists, which would include me, by the way. I mean, I run an investment company, right? Yeah, I'm politically more to the left than to the right, but I'm a business guy. I've never perceived myself as someone that was going to hold a sign or chant a slogan, or anything like that. But then these fires came to Malibu, where I live, and my wife and my 2-year-old and the dog have to jump in the station wagon, to flee them. And
not to mention the campfire, all the fires in Northern California.
These people had it much worse than we did.
Yeah.
Right. And when that starts happening, you realize that you don't really have the luxury of this kind of passive approach to these issues if you're somebody that wants to do something about them. By the way, and I'm not sure how much you got into this with Rory, the Democratic Party has really lost its way on these issues. There has not been the amount of leadership that was necessary from the Democrats in past years.
Let me ask you a little bit about that, because as someone who's a centrist, right, I am not surprised that the institutions have failed us. Mostly because, and again, I am not touting either side, but when I watch the Democratic debates, I see a bunch of legislators that have not figured it out.
Yeah.
They're like, I'm going to figure it out. Now you are? I don't believe it. I don't believe that they're going to be able to build a situation. I mean, I'd rather see like the Bill Gates Foundation approach, where we want to fix this problem and we're going to invest money in brilliance and figure out a way to sequester carbon, whatever the end goal is. I don't know that there is an institutional approach beyond funding this kind of research. We can't hit home runs until we get good at fouling the ball off and then banging out some singles, Yeah,
I mean, I think we need it all, right? So using your example of Bill Gates, we're invested in a company that Bill's invested in called Carbon Engineering, which, and this is not through the Climate Emergency Fund, it's through my day job, which is IX Investments. Carbon engineering is a direct air capture technology of carbon that converts carbon into fuels, right? Very exciting.
Sounds great.
We need it. Bill has been a huge supporter of it. And that sort of research and sort of scientific discovery is incredibly important, okay? Simultaneously, we're invested in another company called Waste Fuel, which converts waste from landfills into aviation fuel. Proven technology. The aviation fuel burns at an 80% reduction in carbon to fossil fuel-based aviation fuel. Huge business opportunity. Amazing return on investment for the investors. But all of these things can be helped by government, right? So there's a lot government can do to incentivize new technologies. There's also a lot that government can do to punish or restrict carbon-intensive industries. And the first thing,
and that's where we're really primarily where we're failing.
We really are. And how about this? How about we start by just getting rid of taxpayer subsidies of fossil fuels?
Yeah.
We spend more on taxpayer subsidies of fossil fuels than we do on the Pentagon. Okay. This is the most taxpayer subsidized industry out there. It is a failing industry propped up by the taxes that we pay.
Yeah.
Start with that.
Yeah.
Right. So if you just remove the taxpayer subsidies from oil and gas and say, all right, guys, you're these sort of free market, entrepreneurs, you believe in the capitalistic system. Great.
Start capitalizing.
Go compete. You compete with renewable energy.
Yeah.
You compete with solar.
Right.
You compete with wind.
Yeah.
Then everything would change. So, government has a huge role to play. The private sector, the estimate on the private sector capital need that always sticks with me is that in order to reach the goals of the Paris Climate Accord, we need $15 trillion of private sector investment. Trillion. Okay, that is a massive amount of capital that's necessary to help move from a dirty energy economy to a clean energy economy, and the government can't do that, alone. So we need philanthropy. And that's the Climate Emergency Fund. We need government for sure. We need investment. That's what I'm trying to do through IX Investments. And in terms of the presidential candidates, most of the Democratic candidates have now adopted something similar to what Governor Jay Inslee, who's the governor of the state of Washington, who was running as the climate candidate. They've all sort of embraced what he was saying, and he's dropped out of the race now, which is unfortunate because he's a friend and a great guy. Most of them are saying the right thing. I think the problem is they may not be saying it in a way that appeals to most Americans, and that's my concern. I worry about whether, for example, Bernie Sanders can articulate that what we need to do on the climate emergency in a way that works for, soccer moms in Ohio.
I'm going to tell you he can't. He can't.
That's my instinct.
Yeah.
You know, I think that.
And can any of them gather the consensus required to get legislation passed?
Well, the key is speaking about it in a way that matters for people's lives, right? So, for example, you know, this massive investment we need to make in a new clean energy economy is a huge creator of jobs, right? So in places that, you know, like in the Rust Belt that have lost jobs, that are economically depressed, transition to a clean energy economy can represent the single best hope of
For the
building new
turnaround.
industries,
Mhm.
right? And America has a very good example of transitioning our economy in a very rapid way to meet a great threat, and that's World War II. So, you know, we have in our history at least one really good example of the entire country, at first reluctantly, by the way.
Right.
If you'll recall the history
Yeah.
of World War II, Americans
Sure,
were
we
not
didn't want
excited
in.
about this.
Yeah.
But over time, we rose to meet a great threat, in that case, fascism and the perceived threat from the Japanese and from the Nazis, that transitioned our economy very rapidly. People that were making ovens and toasters in May were making bombs in June. And we can do it, but it's going to require an enormous mobilization.
And
across
people
all of
who
society.
were homemakers in May were making bombs in
Hell
June.
yeah, they might have the only,
Machinists.
Yeah.
they figured it out, right? And that is a unique thing about this country. We
That's
have
right.
the ability to rise up and do great things.
I'm going to punctuate that point by saying we refer to that generation as the greatest generation, and we have an opportunity now to answer up and become the new greatest generation.
And you know, in many ways, it's the biggest challenge that the world has ever faced and our country has ever faced. And it's those times that we look back on
Mhm.
with great admiration, you know, for the people that did the right thing in a difficult time. And so now's a time for courage. Now's also a time to tell the truth. You know, the central premise of Extinction Rebellion is tell the truth and act like that truth is real. The truth is we have 415 parts per million of carbon in our atmosphere. That's more than we have had in hundreds of millions of years. We have about 200 species going extinct a day. Biodiversity is suffering because of the changing temperatures. That's the truth. Once you awake to the truth and decide you want to actually do something about it, it's a very empowering thing, as opposed to sort of covering your ears and pretending that it's not real and lying effectively to your kids about it. So I'm about the truth these days.
This deserves its own episode.
Sure, guys. I mean, I'm up for
Terrific.